if you're our guest, we're in this conversation around the idea of faith. And we're calling it Starting Point because I believe and we believe that no matter where you are, right, if you're just kind of exploring this whole idea of Jesus, if you're new, like, hey, I'm just new, I'm just trying to figure this out. Many of you are returning, at some point in your childhood, you went to Mass or you went to confirmation or you did something, but you got away, kind of Allegra's story, and now you're back. And I know there's some in this room who have walked with Jesus for years. But the reality is we all need a fresh start. We all need a restart. Right? I was talking to my mom this week on the phone. I was traveling and I had a little bit extended time that I talked to her. I don't get to do that super often. And it was just hit me fresh. She just kind of started sharing a little bit of what was going on in her life. And I was like, I mean, here's a lady who's in her 60s, right, who has walked with Jesus for decades, right? For decades. She found a relationship with Jesus in her early 20s and has been faithful walking with Jesus. And she's sharing, and it just, again, I'm just busy doing life, right? I got kids, I got bills, I got things, all that you got, traffic. And she's sharing, and it hit me afresh, and I put it in perspective. See, my mom, over 20 years ago, my mom got diagnosed with an immune system disorder. And so for 20 years, right, every 8 weeks, she has to go to the hospital and they do an infusion where they run medicine into her body. So every 8 weeks for 20 years. And she was just kind of rehearsing and she was just saying like, Greg, why? Why? I mean, sometimes, Greg, I just ask God, like, God, 20 years, God. Like, it's painful. She has to go in. It takes 6 hours to run the medicine into her body, and she sits in this hospital room. And then she gets sick afterwards. There's like a 2-day sickness thing. And she's like, Greg, I just wonder why sometimes. I'm sitting there on the phone like, 20 years. The reality is we all have questions, don't we? We all got doubts. But here's the principle. This is the life principle I think we can hold. You'll see it on the screen right here. It says this. It says, silent doubts rarely find answers. You can say that about questions too. Unasked questions don't usually get answers. Right? And what we're trying to do in this conversation about faith is we're trying to push all of us. We're intentionally trying to push all of us and encourage all of us, like, hey, wherever you are on the spectrum of faith, whatever you're going through in life, whatever struggles you got, maybe your life is like perfect. I don't know who that is, but I'd like to know you. But whatever it's going perfect, wherever you are, all of us have questions and doubts. And instead of holding those in, right, and just like, well, I can't say that in church, they'll judge me. Like, no. We're like intentionally having conversations about faith. And we're encouraging to have it. And one of my favorite things about this is week 3. This is like, we're going to do this for like 8 weeks. One of my favorite things that has happened over these past 3 weeks is on Sundays through videos, which you've seen some of those, and they're online. And then our neighborhood teams, which are teams that meet throughout the week and gather in smaller teams, smaller groups. And people are sharing their stories. People are sharing their stories. I'm encouraging people, like, hey, go have coffee. Go have lunch throughout the week. Like, hey, you go out and just say, hey, tell me your story. Just tell me your story. People are like, well, I don't know what to say, or I don't, like, no. Just share your story's you. That's unique to you. Share your story. And so we're trying to really encourage that because the reality is, okay, here's the reality. Now, the idea of church obviously has got jacked up and means all kinds of things. But the original idea, right? If you study the original idea of the church, it was a gathering of people, okay? It wasn't a building. It wasn't some kind of liturgy. It wasn't all this ritual. It was just a gathering of people around the simple mission and idea of Jesus. That was it. And God knew, He says, hey, you need each other. You need community. You need to do life together because life is going to be hard. There's going to be ups and downs and challenges. And if you try to do it alone, you're toast. All right? I mean, look at this right here on the screen. It says this. Faith based on personal experience alone eventually buckles under the weight of personal experience. All right? Faith based on personal experience alone eventually will buckle under the weight of personal experience. See, God knew. He says, hey, no, you need community. You need other people. Right? Because sometimes things are going to be great and you need people to come along and go, yes, Let's rejoice with you. And sometimes, like my friend that texted me this morning, life is going to be really hard. And blessings to him for reaching out to me and going, hey, this is hard right now. I need help. Now, one of the cool things that you're going to be really glad you're here today is Heather, who just sang for us. I've asked her to come and share her story with us. And this is I don't know if you've ever shared your story in public in front of a bunch of strangers. It's not easy, okay? So would you guys give just a big hand, and Heather's going to come up here. And we're going to kind of do this conversational style. Now, I'll let her introduce herself in a minute, but kind of how this started, it was a year and a half ago or so. Heather was here with her husband, and my wife is over there. We all went to dinner together, and we're just having dinner, and I was paying. So that means I was driving the conversation. So I'm going to pay. I'm going to still say we're the conversation. So I say, I don't know what prompted me. I just look across the table at Heather and go, Heather, I've never heard your story. Tell me your story. And so for the next hour plus,
I won't take that much time.
She tells her story, and it just blew me. I was blown away. I mean, it was just this back to this principle of like, wow. I was so lifted up. I was so encouraged. And so we had a chance for her to be here this weekend. So I asked Heather to share her story. So why don't you just kind of tell us who you are, start at the beginning. Tell us you're from that real cold place.
Yes. I think unfortunately, I was trying to escape and it followed me. My name is Heather Morris, and I am from New York City. I'm originally born and raised in Buffalo, New York. So basically, I'm Canadian, where there's lots of snow. Only people from Chicago and Vancouver maybe may understand me and my plight. But I grew up in Buffalo to my parents, Robert and Sandra, of a mixed faith kind of family. My father is a Jehovah's Witness until this very day. And my mother was Baptist but had gotten into Jehovah's Witness teachings and she was married to my dad. So by the time they got divorced when I was 3. And by the time I was 5, I was already had a psychiatrist because they were both driving me crazy with their religious beliefs and their staunch way of presenting it. So by the time I was like 9, I was like, you guys don't look like these Bible stories. I think I like God, but I definitely don't like anything that is religious. And that kind of just put me on a path. I started growing up really quickly by 11. My grandparents were in the house until I was 11. After my parents were divorced and they left. I remember that being a really key point. When they left, my mom was dating, and I pretty much was on my own. And because I didn't want to have anything to do with spirituality or things like that, and I'm also 11, but I'm running around with kids who are like 14 and 15, and I'm getting into things that 14 and 15-year-olds on the east side of Buffalo and the inner city get into. So I was running with I spent my 12th birthday in what we would now call a trap house. Hanging out with whoever, because I felt more acceptance from them, and I had grown up with such judgment from 2 people who said they knew God. And basically, God really was keeping me, but I was pretty hopeless at a very early age. By 15, the first person I had a deep relationship with, there was a huge shooting in my city, and I was in the middle of it, and I didn't have support enough to be able to even process. 5 friends were all gunned down that year, and that was the year that innocence was pretty much done, and it made so much real to me. So at that point, I was maybe inside crying out to God, but I just wasn't willing to go to anyone, quote unquote, religious. I wasn't willing to go to a church because I felt like I was wretched at that point, and I was just unlovable. My mother was rehearsing that unlovableness by the things that she would say because she was verbally abusive. So that's how it started.
So a lot of guilt and shame and stuff obviously projected toward you. Now, obviously you're very talented musically. So music played a huge part of your role. I mean, people may not know you're actually, are you still with Sony Music?
Yeah.
So you're signed recording singer,
A songwriter.
singer,
copywriter.
songwriter, if I could talk,
Yeah.
recording artist. So obviously music. So how does music kind of come in your teens, 20s?
Man, music basically saved my life. My mother and I split, and I walked out. I got tired of the things she would say when it was in my senior year of high school. So I was homeless my senior year. I moved in with a boyfriend. Then I moved in with like an aunt. She was the one aunt who didn't get along with my mother. So it was just a lot of discord and craziness. It was the least likely place for someone to reach out for you, but it meant a lot to me. And at that point, I was crying out to God. I had visited a church. I had an experience where I had finally heard a word from up front that spoke to everything that I was crying about in secret. But like you said, these quiet doubts, basically they never get answered. And it was like he heard them. But it was so supernatural for me that now I'm scared. I'm like, I am out here doing all types of things. So I ran. But I like in that line in that song, it was saying, like, even when we run away. So I ran away. And while I was out running and working jobs and trying to figure out how to eat and get and graduate from high school, some friends come to pick me up from a sneaker store. And they didn't pick me up to do anything good. And that's probably why I went with them. But that night, they asked me to sing a song with them and record some songs. And I recorded it. And an A&R from New York City, from Universal, came and met me. And he was like, that voice came out of that little girl. And I was like, yeah. He's like, make her a part of the group. He was like, we're going to get you guys signed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But it was so miraculous that he stayed with me. And they walked me through the graduation. And they stayed until I turned 18, so I'd be old enough to sign, because my parents were estranged at the time. And it was so miraculous that I was like, okay, God does see me. And the one thing that I was always told would never be worth anything, which is my voice, was now going to take care of me when I was willing to do anything to take care of myself. And none of those things were good options. And that made God real. And I tried to change every behavior. I was like, I'm not going to steal no more. Lord, I'm going to be good. Oh, I'm going to stop smoking weed. Oh, Jesus, help me. I was just going to change every behavior. I was going to be good. I still wasn't going to church. I still didn't know how to create community. I knew none of those things. But I did pick up my Bible, and I did start to read it. And that was my first step. That was my first, okay, he sees me, and he loves me. And I didn't run away that time. I stayed, and I did dig in his word at that point.
So, again, I know your story. So I know from this point, good things are happening musically or whatever, but really deep down in your soul, if you will, and the core of you're really headed for a crash or for, in your words, rock bottom. Can you share that with us?
Even when things were going good, I was I look back, I was always inside feeling like this is not going to last. This is not going to be good, because, I was told that I wasn't bleep, bleep, bleep all my life. So I was self-destructive. I would go to the studio sometimes. I would fall in and out of drinking and smoking weed, because I thought that was my creativity. Like, if I could just, be high or whatever I was, that was going to make me more creative. And it was a slippery slope, because even though it was a high to everyone on the outside, inside I felt like I was worthless. I still had the unlovable track playing. And so we got signed. We did some great music with a lot of great hip hop, great people. And then we got shelved, in the second year. So I was like, I was expecting it. Pardon me. I went back home. I, got with an old boyfriend. I got pregnant. I was in school. I was just up and down. But, during that process, I got to a place where I came to New York, and I tried again. And but what the catalyst for that was, I started going to church on a Friday night. It was the one time I didn't have to change my clothes and didn't have to put on church clothes, because I didn't have any. And I was hearing this message that was speaking to me. And, through a series of events, I started going to church, and I gave my life, I well, I didn't just give my life. I literally hit a depression. And I didn't really understand depression, didn't know what it was. And I mean, I'm now pregnant for the second time, and it confirmed every bit of shame that was inside of me. Now everybody was gonna know what was really true about me. And I put all of my trust in this relationship with this guy who he spoke a lot of scriptures, but obviously the way we were living was totally different. And now I was at the end of myself. My car was crashed, no job, I'm in a depression. I mean, I didn't want to get up every day, and I would be up all night. And, I considered even, like, after my daughter was born, I even considered taking my life during that time. And I remember sitting there on the side of the tub and being like, God, if you're there, and I think you are, this is where I'm at. And a friend of mine rang the doorbell that day, and she told me to come on, let's get dressed. Let's go to the mall. And she has no idea. I got to tell her years later. Wow. She had no idea. And like soon after that, I was attending church, and actually when I finally walked past all these people, I was in the one church I didn't want to be in because I felt like people knew my story or knew my backstory. And I remember him saying, like, aren't you tired? I know you're tired. And now I look at that as the magic word. And aren't you tired of doing it alone? Yeah. And I finally walked up, and I just fell into somebody's hands, and I gave my life, and she began to pray. And from there on out, it wasn't so much about me making change, but he changed everything. Everything that I couldn't change started to fall off. And he started bringing the right people around me, other people who were young in their faith, and people who weren't judgmental, people who weren't, religious, but had relationship and wanted to have a relationship with me. And that was the beginning of everything that is happening in my life now. But that was my starting point.
And so kind of last thing here, obviously you have this starting point, it's real, like you obviously knew of God or believe God, but you have this starting point, it's real, things begin to change in your life. It's still not easy, right? I mean,
oh no.
You got 4 kids.
I have.
And your husband's crazy.
Yes. So there's all kinds of good things. There's like after that, like literally the year after I moved to New York with both kids and like a couple $100. God protects fools and babies. I qualify for both. And I'm on this whirlwind of faith. I'm so high. It's like when you first fall in love, like I could ask God anything and it would just happen. I was like, whoa, this is awesome. But I started getting further away from that reading of the word that I did way back there. And so things would get rocky, and I fell into negative relationships, work relationships that were controlling, and things that were difficult. But now I was facing it with him. Yeah. Now I was starting to understand grace. Even though I felt condemned, there was this other truth standing up to say, no, I love you. And though I was still struggling to believe it, over time, going through those things, led me to such a secure place that even when things were difficult, I was able to stand. Like when I met my husband, I was volunteering for Young Life. I was a single mom. I was like, I finally got this single thing done, like solidified. I don't know if I'm ready to do the whole relationship thing. I haven't done that right yet. But I was ready to face the feelings, but my faith was stronger. So I felt afraid. I felt like, I have 2 kids, you don't have any, you're a pastor. I really didn't plan on marrying a pastor. If you knew, and it was that, mantra, if you knew my story, but by that time I knew that my story was redemptive. Yeah. And I was able to say, like, the wealth of the wicked was laid up for the just, that me and my daughters were a good thing. Yeah. And that was all from going through those trials with God, as opposed to running away. Like when my cousin died of cancer, she was the one who introduced me to faith. Like I remember thugging it out with God. Like, I just don't know if I like you, and this is not fair. My prayers don't matter. But every time we went through those difficult places, I saw him more. So it's not about one starting point. It's like all the different things that happen in our life, are starting points. We always get more. I don't think death and resurrection was just salvation, but he was modeling what our lives are like in him. that we're going to go through some ugly, difficult cross places, and then we're going to go into glorious places with him. But it's together.
Yeah. So what you guys think, Heather, for sharing with us this thing? The courage, to share your story. She's like, hey, I've been feeling like God's prompted me to share more. Like, okay, good, I'll give you some chance. Hey, as we kind of wrap this part up, this is kind of the word that I've been sensing for myself, but also for us, right, as a community. It's this idea, like, hey, wherever you are on your journey, your faith journey, I feel like God's telling you, take the next step. Right? Like, take the next step. Now, that's going to take some trust. Right? It's going to take a little courage because some of you are stuck. Right? You've been in the same spot a long time. Right? Because to go there, even if it's just a small step, a baby step, right? It's going to take some courage. Maybe it'll make you a little uncomfortable. It's like, hey, take the next step. I'm going to show you just something real quick. It's in John. There's a Bible on your seat. It's in John chapter 4. It's Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. The New Testament starts with these stories of Jesus, the life of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John is the fourth one. And I just want to look at just a few verses. John chapter 4, verse 46. It's on page 726 for those that want to take the shortcut. 726 at the very bottom. I'm just going to read starting in 46. So John chapter 4, verse 46. You guys see that? Can you nod when you get there so I know I'm not talking to myself? Thank you. I do that often, but not today. John chapter 4, verse 46. Again, this is John, who was an eyewitness, follower of Jesus. He's recording what he saw, and he says this. He says, once more he's talking about Jesus, visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. Top of the next page. And there was a certain royal official, okay, whose son lay sick at Capernaum. Okay, so here's this dad who's a high-ranking official, and his son is sick. Verse 47. It says, when this official, this high-ranking, when he heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him. Look at John's word here. He begged him to come and heal his son, who's close to death. So here's this. Look at this guy's got stature. He's got, he's arrived. He's got money. He's got all this stuff. But his son is sick. His son is sick. And so he goes, and I don't know what the scene looks like exactly, but I mean, if you beg someone, like, please, my kid's asking for candy, please, he's begging. He said, Jesus, just come to my house because my son is sick. Nothing else matters, right? You know this, right? If you're in pain, right? If something's bad in your life, if it's a loved one, nothing else matters, right? Help me. Verse 48. Jesus says this, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you will never believe. The royal official said, verse 49, Sir, Master, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus said, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word. That's key right there. You see that? The man took Jesus at his word and departed. He didn't need to come down. And while he's on his way home, his servant comes and meets him with news that the boy, his son, got better. And he said, hey, when? He said, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left. And the father realized, verse 53, that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believe. You think? You believe too, wouldn't you? So that's a key line. The man took Jesus at his word. I'll never forget when I was about 8 years old, and I was, in an 8-year-old kind of mind exploring the idea of Jesus. And there was a guy who was helping, kind of like what they're doing over there in the kids right now. There was a guy who was kind of leading a little group of kids, and I was one of the kids sitting in the circle, right? And he said this. Now, this is like from 8 years old. This is implanted in my. He said, if I right now went outside, and we're on the second floor here, right? And let's just say that window was an opening. And he said, if I went down to the ground, and you were standing right there in that window, and it was open, and I went like this, and I said, hey, jump, I'll catch you. Would you jump? And the answer around the circle is, no, I'm not jumping. And then he said this. He looked at me and he said, Greg, if your dad, now again, I have a great relationship with my dad. My dad is a great man. He said, if your dad went down there and he went like this, he said, Greg, jump, I got you. Would you jump? I said, yeah. You see the difference? I mean, this was a good dude. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. He's kind of thin, though. He didn't look super strong. But he was, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But the difference, right? Trust. Right? Trust. Because my dad, over years and years of investment and relationship, had built trust. And here's what I think Jesus is saying to me and saying to you. Wherever you are, right? Wherever you are on this, right? You may be like, I don't even know if this whole thing's real. Is there really a God? I got more questions than I got answers. Join the crowd. Right? Trust. Whatever your next step is, my encouragement to you right now is take it. Trust. The only way to learn if someone is worthy of trust is to trust them. Right? That's how you learn. There's no other way to learn. Like, well, I don't know. I just don't know. We'll just sit. No. The only way to know if someone is trustworthy is to trust them and see if they come through for you. And I believe that God is looking at all of us today. Say, trust. You see it in the stories on the video. You hear it in Heather's story. It's not easy. It's not always painless, but trust. Would you guys pray with me? God, we come before you now. Well, I come before you, God. I know you're a good God and God that we can trust. But I know there's a room full of people here who are in various spots in their journey, in this conversation around faith. And kind of like you did with the official, what you did with Heather and Allegra and so many, God, you're just saying, hey, you're at a point where you got to kind of take a step, trust. And so, God, even in this moment, I pray as we kind of keep this conversation going, that some of us in this room, wherever we are, whatever that next step looks like, that we'll take it today. That we'll take that step and trust. So God, give us courage, give us strength,